Hi, I'm Katie Ayers with the Medicine Hat SPCA. Welcome to Critter Care. Today's segment is about pet first aid. We're going to be talking about some ways to handle things if your animal is injured. So if they have a bleeding wound, for example, how to go about bandaging that until you can access vet care. We're going to be talking about administering medication and pet first aid kits. And we're also going to be talking about, with all the heat that we have right now in Medicine Hat, leaving your animals in hot vehicles, why that's not such a good idea, as well as walking your dogs in this weather and how to make sure that they're not burning their paws. So stay tuned. So today we're talking about pet first aid. Similar to human first aid, pet first aid is to be used mostly in case of an emergency and something to assist you before you're able to get to the vet with whatever the issue might be that you're dealing with your animal. There's something that's really important with pet first aid though that I want to talk about, and that's prevention. So pet first aid absolutely does not take the place of vet care or vet visits. It's super important to keep up with your annual vet visits, or if you have to do them more frequently than that, if your animal has a particular medical issue, then absolutely keep up with that. For prevention, it's really important to talk to your vet about vaccines. A lot of the illnesses that you could potentially be dealing with can be mitigated by having your animal vaccinated, and vaccinated with the right vaccines and vaccinated at the right time throughout their lives. We also really encourage you to spay and neuter your pets. For example, this animal, this is Mama Meredith, so she came to us when she had one-day-old puppies. She had 8 one-day-old puppies. So if she hadn't been, she will be spayed, of course, before she's adopted, but if she wasn't, a lot of animals that have had puppies like her will later develop an infection in their uterus, and it's called a pyometra, or they are more likely to also develop cancers kind of in their uterus or in their ovaries as well. So having your animal spayed and neutered, besides of course helping with pet overpopulation issues, it also for their medical care is recommended by veterinarians to help increase their lifespan, as well as there are some behavioral benefits to having your pet fixed as well. So we're going to be talking about ways to know, if your animal needs to access veterinary care, as well as going through some of the pet first aid basics. And to learn more about pet first aid, you can register online for the pet first aid course, or you can just stop by the shelter and fill it out in person. We're going to be talking about bleeding wounds and bandaging. And the reason why we talk about this in pet first aid is because it's one of the most common, inflictions that you might have to deal with in terms of your pet's care. So it's not uncommon for, especially with dogs, for them to get an injury to their ear, whether it is from, perhaps they were playing a little too hard with another dog, or if they were in a bit of a scrap with another dog. Also, paw injuries are not uncommon. They are, of course, walking on their paws all the time, and some of them are more callous than others, and some are more likely to get cut because of that. But they will often, step on a piece of glass or just something when they're out and about at the dog park or on a walk, so something that might cause some bleeding. We also see injuries, bleeding injuries with dogs with their tails, and usually those are with the bigger breed dogs that have those kind of whip-like tails, like pit bulls or Rottweilers or Dobermans, and it's usually the happy ones because they're wagging their tail too hard, and sometimes they'll split and they'll start bleeding. So if you're dealing with some type of bleed, we want to go over how you would bandage that until you would be able to get the animal to the vet. You pretty much always need to follow up with the vet, just depending on the severity of the bleed, for a couple of reasons. One is because there's the possibility of infection, so they might need to go on antibiotics. And then depending on the wound, they perhaps might need stitches as well. So that's a second reason. So if you're dealing with a bleeding wound on the ear, and Mama Meredith is actually kind of a mid-sized dog, so she's in the middle, so we'll see what works best for her. You would want to take some sterile gauze. So in your first aid kits, you generally will have the sealed packages of sterile gauze. And if for some reason there's gravel or anything like that on there, you can take one of those pads, the benzalkonium pads, and you can wipe away the gravel first. And we're pretending this is sterile gauze. Then you would put the gauze, of course, just like with a human bleed, you would put pressure on the wound. And then you can take your gauze rolls, and these are also, they come in packages and they're sterile in first aid kits. And with Meredith, based on her size, because she's a mid-sized dog, what I would probably do, we'll see how well she'll cooperate for me, is you get someone like I have here with Dee, holding and restraining. And then you want to go in both in front and in back of the ear, because if you just do it in back, then it'll slip off. So because of her size, and she's a more mid-sized dog, I'm doing this kind of all in one step. Now, then we would take our tape from our first aid kit and we would tape it and attach it that way. So that would be okay until they get to the vet. If she was a bigger dog, or a dog with, she's really relaxed right now, or a dog with really kind of floppy long ears, you could put the pressure with the gauze on, and then you could wrap the ear and then do this where you're attaching kind of that ear to the head. And this step is really important because what do dogs like to do? They like to shake their head, or they like to paw at it. So if the ear isn't kind of attached to the head with a gauze roll, then chances are they will swipe that bandage right off. So that is bandaging an ear. So the second wound that we're going to practice bandaging is wound on the paw. And you would take your sterile gauze just like normal, and you would apply pressure to the wound on the paw, and then you take your sterile bandage roll. And the important thing with the paw, two things, is that one, you want to, yeah, I know, it doesn't feel so good. You're faking being injured very well. You want to go up over the joint, and you want to go over the actual paw as well, so that it doesn't slip off. So one thing you want to make sure that you do is not wrap it too tight. So I see most commonly in the classes that people actually wrap too loose. You want to be able to comfortably put like a finger in, but it needs to be tight enough, of course, that it will stay on. When in doubt, go a little looser to be safe, because you don't want to cut off their circulation, of course. And then again, we would tape this. So that would be taped. So that's how you would bandage a paw until you're able to get the animal into the vet. Most of the time, they're not going to want to walk on this. We can see if we put it down, she might just hold it up. She'll be like, what the heck? So you might have to carry the animal into your vehicle to transport them. Most likely, at some point in your pet's life, you're going to have to administer medications. The most common type would be some type of pill or tablet. Dogs are usually easier to pill than cats in most people's experience. So with dogs, for the most part, you can put the pill into some kind of wet food, just like this. And you can tell she's interested already. You can make a little meatball. So you just cover the pill with wet food, and usually dogs will take that pretty easily. You might have a little tricky dog who likes to lick all of the wet food and then spit the pill out. So I've certainly had those before as well. Some tricks that you can use are to take the pill and dip it in peanut butter, or to dip it in just butter in general. Because of the thickness of it, it tends to stick to the pill more, so it's harder for them to spit it out. And worst case scenario, I'm just going to get Mama to sit here. Worst case scenario, you can open the mouth, take your pill, and kind of pop it back as well. With an adult dog, this works okay, because you can see once they lick their lips, she's swallowed it. Puppies, that's near impossible to do for whatever reason. They pretty much will always spit it out. So you'll have to chase that with a little syringe of water or something to get them to swallow it. So she took that really well. Another trick, especially if you're working with a cat and you're trying to pill them, is to put their bum against you, because animals are most likely to want to go backwards. So if you're coming at them with a pill or even with some liquid medication that's in a syringe, they're going to start backing away from you. So if their back is to you, then they're not able to really get away as easily. She's not cooperating, of course, but if she were to be sitting up, like so, and I would go behind her like that and pop it in. Hopefully that gives you guys some tips. And we're going to talk a little bit about administering eye medication now. Okay, so we're just going to show quickly how to do some eye drops. And with a larger dog, one of the best things you can do is what I'm doing right now. So they're facing backwards and you're kind of straddling them a little bit. And then you have the eye drop container in your hand. And then you're tipping the head. Oh, you're going to sit. That's fine too. No, you're not going to sit. Okay, Bandit, sit. Bandit, sit. She's against the wall now. Tipping the head and then just squeezing one drop. And you want to make sure that you're not touching the tip of the bottle to the eye, because that could cause infection as well as it could scratch the eye, which we don't want to do. So like you saw at the beginning, they like to go backwards. So if you have them facing back into you, you tend to have more control. So that's the best way to try to administer eye drops in my experience. If you're actually dealing with a cat or a smaller dog, you can have them on a table, same thing. Their butt would be kind of into you, and then you can tilt their head and administer the eye drops backwards as well. So I just wanted to show you quickly how to take a temperature if you need to. So this is just the standard digital thermometer. And usually we put a little bit of lubricant on it just so it's a little nicer for the animals. Sometimes little puppies might cry. I'm not sure if she will or not. I turned it on already, and then I'm just inserting the digital part, and I do a little wiggle because I find it goes in more easily. There we go. She was clenching a little. And you just give it its second, or its 30 seconds like it normally takes, beeps at you. So her temperature was 38.1, normal's 37.5 to 39.5, so she doesn't have a temperature, so that's perfect. And then at the end, of course, you can disinfect it, so I usually just use a little bit of alcohol on a cotton pad and then just disinfect that so that it's ready for use for the next time. You want to make sure that you label this one for pets as well. If you're taking the temperature of an animal, especially if it's not one of your own animals, or if you have multiple animals in your home, you'll want to disinfect the thermometer afterwards. There could be all sorts of potential bacteria or different things that could be transferred by not disinfecting it. So we just use standard isopropyl alcohol to disinfect. Usually we just wipe it down. If you want to have a really good sterilization, if you're concerned about something like parvo, then you can immerse it in alcohol, just the tip, of course, not the whole thing, for 10 minutes to properly sterilize. You can also buy the thermometer covers, which are super handy, and that's mostly what we use here at the shelter. And you just slip the thermometer in, and it's just a single, I'm not doing this really well, but single use cover. And then you can throw it out after. You don't have to worry about the disinfecting so much. One of the most important things with pet first aid is being prepared. So having the materials that you need to be able to administer first aid when it is required. We do sell pet first aid kits, of course, during our pet first aid classes. You can also purchase them at a number of different pet stores. A standard pet first aid kit will look something like this. This is a really good size kit to keep in your vehicle. This is the one I keep in my vehicle. There's also ones you can get that attach to a leash, and those are really handy for when you're out just walking your dog, specifically a dog in that case. And there's also larger ones you can get for in your home. So some of the items that you want to have in your pet first aid kit are shown here. So there are the antiseptic swabs, of course. So like with the wound bandaging, if there is some gravel or dirt or something around a wound, you would be cleaning it off with that first before bandaging it. You have your sterile gauze rolls. It's a tensor bandage if you need to put a little bit more protection on something that you have bandaged. There are your sterile gauze pads here. There's a couple of things that you could use for smaller animals if you needed to make a splint. Pet first aid manual, of course. Gloves. Gloves are included in most pet first aid kits, although there aren't a lot of diseases necessarily that are transferable between animals to humans based on from their blood, but it's still a good idea to keep clean and to be safe if at all possible. So if they're available, do wear them. A lot of them have bandage scissors because you do need to cut these things, and it's really difficult to just do that by hand. Often there's shock blankets. So just like humans, animals can go into shock as well. There's a number of different situations which might cause the animal to go into shock. Different injuries from being overheated or too cold, from trauma like being hit by a car, from ingesting a poison, anything along those lines. If untreated, shock can cause death. Shock causes all of the blood in the body to kind of pool towards the vital organs to keep them going, but at a certain point, if it's left untreated, then an animal can die from shock. So you need to be sure to treat them. And you treat shock by keeping an animal warm, because all of the blood does pool to their vital organs. Generally, their extremities are quite cold. So you keep the animal warm, you keep them calm and quiet, and try not to move them around very much, and then you need to get them to the vet as soon as possible. The animals that are most at risk, of course, would be the young, like puppies and kittens, and the more senior animals, and they're just a little bit more vulnerable to going into shock. If there is an eye injury that you're dealing with, a lot of kits do come with an eye wash. Depending on the injury, if there's a small piece of gravel or something that you need to flush out, that could be something you use. Eyes are very, very sensitive though, so generally speaking, you want a vet to be dealing with anything, of course, that is embedded in the eye. If there's an eye wound that's bleeding, then you would bandage it just like any bleeding wound. But if for some reason you do need to flush it, if there's a chemical or some dirt or something in the eye, then you do have that available to you. Something that's not included in a lot of pet first aid kits, but I personally always add to my kits, is a thermometer. Very important to label this for animals. You don't want to be mixing that up with the thermometer that people in your house use. And it is very much the same. There is the silver tip to a digital thermometer, and that is what is inserted in the anus. And you can use some lubricating jelly if you desire. Most of the time, though, they will handle it no problem. And the normal temperature for a dog and a cat is 37.5 to 39.2 about. And if it's over that, then of course that would mean that they have a fever, so it could be a sign of them dealing with infection. And if it's lower, then that shows that their body temperature is cold. So that could be the case if perhaps it was an animal that was left outside for too long, or recovering from surgery not very well, something along those lines. I find this really important as a tool in the pet first aid kit, because if I'm kind of wondering how urgent a situation is, do I need to take this animal into the vet? Then I'll take their temperature, and that will help me see if they have a fever or if they're cold. If there's one extreme or the other, then it to me is a sign that something is more urgent and the animal needs to be seen right away. So those are some of the items that you would have in a pet first aid kit, and my suggested addition of the thermometer. We hear a lot about this in social media, I know, but we also want to reiterate the importance of not leaving your dogs in hot vehicles. And there's a number of reasons for this. Of course, they can overheat really quickly. Even when you have the windows down, the still air can easily go 10 degrees over. And when it's already, 20 to 35 degrees here in the summertime, then we're talking some pretty hot temperatures inside of the vehicles. Some people will say, oh, but I put the air conditioning on and then I went and did my food shopping, so the dog's okay. The worry with this, and it certainly has happened, is that what if something happened and your air conditioning failed and you were gone for a longer period of time, and the animal would have then been in a vehicle also with the windows down and perhaps no air conditioning as well. So that's a bit of the worry with counting on an air-conditioned vehicle. So ideally you would just leave them at home, or if there's someone else in the vehicle that can wait with the pet while you're running inside for something, then that's a good way to handle it as well, because they can monitor and make sure that the animal isn't overheated and has access to water and everything that they might need. Animals can absolutely suffer from heat stroke if they are outside for too long in the sun. So we want to make sure that if they're in your yards as well, that they have access to shade and access to fresh water. And ideally that they're not out there for prolonged periods of time in an area, especially where they can't get access to too much shade. If an animal is overheated, they'll become really lethargic. They will have a temperature usually because their body temperature raises. And it's really important to get that temperature down if they do have a fever, and it can eventually lead to having seizures and some other more serious consequences as well. So just remember to consider your pets with all of the heat that we have. Be sure not to leave them in the car unattended, and ideally leave them at home if you're having to go out and do some shopping. The other thing I wanted to mention quickly is we get a lot of questions about walking our dogs in the heat. So at what temperature is it too hot to walk your dogs? I don't know about you, but I have one of my 3 dogs anyways. She will not let me go a day, whether it's plus 30 or minus 30, without a walk. So I have to use my judgment, and I have to dress her properly. So in the heat, I can do things like put booties on to protect the pads of her paws, make the walks really short. So we usually do no more than 10 minutes if it's over about 27 degrees in our case. And of course, having access to water, so bringing one of those portable dog water dishes can be handy as well. You want to test the ground with your foot and make sure that it's not too hot. If it's too hot for you to walk on, it's too hot for them to walk on. There are some protectors that you can get, like I was talking about with the booties. You can also get a pad protector. It's like a cream, almost like a wax, that will help as well if you do have one of those dogs like mine that's going to insist on going for a walk even in the warmer weather. So you need to use your judgment and make sure that you are considering their needs as well, and taking care of their paws in the hot weather is super important. Otherwise you could be dealing with some blisters, some burns, or even some of the pad peeling off. Thank you for watching Critter Care. We would like to encourage you to visit our website, www.medhatspca.ca, and you can look at our adoptable animals on the website. We also, of course, are always in need of different supplies and donations, and we're always looking for volunteers as well. On the website, we also have a number of resources available under our resource tab. So there's a number of different tip sheets there for both cat and dog behavior and teaching and medical issues, as well as small animals. And we also have some videos that you can watch to learn more about your animals and the different needs that they have.